I was playing a disc golf tournament in Austin, Texas, shortly after I turned 50, and I remember the exact moment this hit me. We were walking to the fourth hole, just making casual conversations, and one of the guys on my card asked where I was from and what I did. It was such a normal question, the kind I had answered automatically for more than 25 years, but this time I froze because I realized I didn't have an answer that felt right anymore. It wasn't that anyone judged me, no one leaned in, no one smirked. The group just kept walking. But internally, I felt exposed in a way I hadn't anticipated. For decades, I had carried a ready made identity that fit neatly into social situations. I never had to think about it, it was always there like a reflex. Now there was a pause where confidence used to be, and in that brief silence, I became aware of how much I had relied on that quick response to steady myself in the world. For most of my adult life, I could respond without hesitation. I had a title, I had a role, I had a clear place in the professional ecosystem. My last formal title was Director of Product Design, and I had worked very hard to earn it. I was proud of it. It represented decades of effort, late nights, and leadership growth and accumulated competence. At a dinner party or a casual introduction, it functioned as shorthand. It communicated accomplishment in seconds. People knew exactly where to place you. Standing there on that fairway in Austin, none of that felt available to me in the same way. So I simply said, I'm retired. And I left it there. But even as the words came out of my mouth, they felt thin. I had the instinct to qualify it, to add something about my background in software engineering or the years I had spent, building teams and products. But I stopped myself because it felt like it'd be reaching backwards to reattach a label that no longer described my present life. It would have been true, but it would have also been defensive. That moment stayed with me. What surprised me later was how much of my self-worth had quietly been tied to that professional identity. It wasn't just the title itself, but the entire ecosystem around it. The team I led, the colleagues I worked alongside, the culture, the travel, and the unmistakable feeling of being needed. When you operate at that level for long enough, the reinforcement is constant. Meetings confirm your importance. Decisions reinforce your relevance. People wait on your approval. There's a steady signal that you matter. When I stepped away, that signal went silent. The email stopped. The meeting invites disappeared. My calendar no longer filled itself automatically. No one needed my decision in order to move forward. No one was waiting for my update. At first, that quiet felt peaceful, almost luxurious. Then, if I'm honest, it felt disorienting. I had to confront the uncomfortable truth that the world would keep moving just fine without me. And of course, it does. And that realization is humbling in a healthy way. But it also exposes how deeply many of us, especially men in high-performing environments, attach our identity to output. We are conditioned to measure ourselves by production, by scope, by compensation, by title. If someone asked who we were, we would answer with what we did. The two are fused. But when that fusion breaks, there's a gap. In those first months after retirement, I felt less relevant than I expected. I loved my work. I left on my own terms, but the corporate identity had consumed so much of my time and energy that its absence created a kind of social vacuum. Most of my daily interaction had happened in meetings, in conference rooms, on Zoom calls, over work lunches. That was my community structure. But when it vanished, I realized how many of those relationships were built around shared objectives rather than shared life. That doesn't make them fake, it just makes them contextual. So without the title, without the daily interaction, I had to face a quieter question: Who are you when no one is evaluating your performance? That question took time to sit with. And over time, something deeper began to surface. Retirement has slowly returned me to my roots. And I don't mean that sentimentally. I mean that it has stripped away the external markers and forced me to confront what actually defines me when there is no audience and no quarterly review. First and foremost, I am a child of God. That identity does not fluctuate with compensation bands or performance metrics. Beyond that, I am a husband, a father, a friend, and a neighbor. And those roles were always present, but they had been competing with a very loud professional identity for space. What I'm discovering now is that those containers are far larger than I had imagined. Being a husband when you are not rushing out the door means you can take a walk in the middle of the day without feeling like you're stealing time from your employer. And being a father without constant schedule pressure means you can listen fully instead of mentally drafting your next email. Being a neighbor means you are actually around long enough to notice the rhythm of your own street. And those roles don't come with titles or prestige, but they carry weight. If someone asked me today, what do I do? I still say, I'm retired, but I'm more comfortable leaving it there. Sometimes I'll add that I spend a lot of time playing disc golf or traveling, but I'm careful not to rebuild another performance identity to replace the one I left behind. I'm learning to gently correct the assumption behind the question itself, which is that a person must be defined primarily by an occupation. And here's what has surprised me the most. The identity I am growing into now feels stronger than the one I carried before. It's humbler. And because it isn't tied to a title or an organization, it feels more durable. There's nothing to hide behind anymore. No corporate shield buffering you from the world. What you see is what you get. At first, that felt exposed, but now it feels honest. If you have stepped away from work and felt that awkward pause when someone asks you what you do, it doesn't mean you made a mistake. It does not mean you have lost your value. It may simply mean that you are rebuilding your identity on something more permanent than a job description. And that rebuilding takes time. But in my experience, it's worth the discomfort. Because when the title falls away, what remains is who you actually are. And that turns out to be enough. If you want to continue the conversation, subscribe and let me know in the comments what stood out. I'd appreciate hearing where you're coming from. And as always, thank you for tuning in to John Dawson Retirement.